Hello, my dear players, and today I'm going to be talking about something a little different. Usually what I've been doing up till now is doing these either NPCs or player characters that I've played, and mostly character focused. But now I'm going to do more of a broad topic, which is about alignment in D&D, and how I, as a DM, tend to handle alignment and how I view it. But yes, I will actually note that this has been inspired. Me talking about this has been greatly inspired by by another D&D YouTuber named Ashling VTuber. She did a pretty decent video about her opinions on evil, specifically evil characters in D&D and how to play as one as a player. So because it inspired me, I will link that video in the description, and I hope anyone that finds this video checks her out, even though I doubt I'm giving her much viewership with this. Still, thought I would. With alignment. Alignment's really interesting, and I see a lot of confusion about it at times, because in main D&D lore, how it's treated is like an actual mystical force, not just a description of a character, which makes it very important to strongly define, because there's actual metaphysical consequences to your alignment in main D&D lore and a lot of other D&D lores and stuff like that. But personally, I've never really been one to care for that. I've mostly used alignment in other ways, and spells that focus on alignment I tend to rework slightly, such that they are still just as useful. They are still just as useful. It's just that they're not specifically targeting the alignment necessarily. To actually direct myself and actually, I listen, guys. I literally started recording this video right after I watched that fucking video. My brain is a big string of thoughts, even worse than normal. So bear with me. The biggest thing about D&D alignments is that while they're good, I think they're a really good guiding tool. I don't think you should hold to them too hard. I think a better thing to do is to just construct a character. It's to just write a character without thinking much about alignment. That's how I usually do it. And if an alignment matches them, then apply it. But for those who have trouble doing that or can't do that as well, or just want to go about making a character a different way, then I have nothing against anyone just taking an alignment and the basic description of alignment and trying to build something from there. And with that in mind, I think I'm going to start describing what I think of each of the alignments and how I rule what they're called, how I personally rule them. So the two axes that we're dealing with for alignment is lawful to chaotic, and then good to evil. Lawful does not literally mean you follow the law. That's not what it means. It means that you follow a strict code of conduct. You have a set of rules, which basically meaning a lawful character has a set of rules, a very clear, even strict idea of what those rules mean and how they are applied, and they follow through on that in that strict manner. That is lawfulness. And then chaotic is pretty obvious. They're a lot more vague. They're a lot more ambiguous about what constitutes good and bad and what they should do. They just kind of, case by case isn't necessarily the best way to put it, but they just, it's ambiguity. They don't they almost kind of rail against this idea of being like any type of universal rules. They just kind of do what feels right, usually. And this isn't a necessity to this part of the alignment, but it is often carried with a disregard for rules as well. That is to say that like a rule being present does not influence the decision-making process whatsoever. A lawful character, even if it's a law that they don't follow necessarily, if a law is in place, they would probably carefully consider whether they should break that law, like whether it really contradicts what they believe, whether they really should break it. Like, they'll kind of do a whole thing about it. A chaotic character won't, generally speaking. There's been exceptions, but that's usually how it goes. And then neutral, the in-between between lawful and chaotic, is... best way to put it is it's not that they are in the middle, although that is one interpretation you could go with, that they are kind of chaotic and kind of lawful. What it can also mean, and what it's more usually meaning, is that the way they operate cannot be described by laws, by rules, and nor can it be described by a certain whimsy or chaos. It's something that operates on a different axes. An example of this would be many animals, to some extent. Well, no, actually, the animal example is better for good and evil, so I'll get to that. I don't know, off the top of my head, I don't know what would be a good example of what represents the in-between between chaotic and lawful. If you guys have a good idea of how to describe that middle ground for that on that axis specifically, do comment down below what you think that is, because off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure how to articulate it. I might come back to it later in the video. Now for good and evil, this is a little different, where good and evil is a hotly debated topic because of how philosophical that can really get. And almost any idea that I try to make up is probably going to be disagreed with. It's just how philosophical conversations on good and evil work. So, the best way that I can think to articulate good and evil in a D&D game would be that good just refers that your priorities are for the sake of other people. That however you choose to live, it is for the sake of other people to some extent. While an evil character is someone whose priorities are oriented selfishly. It is oriented towards their own benefit, to such an extent that whether other people are profiting or not off of what they do is irrelevant to them. And sometimes they might even actively want others to be not profiting or to be suffering. But that is not a strict requirement for evil. And then a neutral between the two is, as I may have hinted at, most easily described as just their motivations cannot be aligned around selflessness or selfishness, which is a lot like an animal. An animal is in a state of survival, of constant survival mode. It's kind of hard to call it selfless or selfish or selfless, because it just kind of acts on instinct and doesn't necessarily have an understanding that it's hurting other beings. Like a tiger doesn't understand that there's any potential wrong being done in the world by killing another animal to live. It doesn't understand that. And even if it did, it would still be murky ground, because this is what the tiger has to do. This isn't... It is what it is. And that's a good way to describe neutrality on the good and evil axes. A lot of times it is what it is. And that's kind of how their mindset goes. It's not quite Selfish, not quite selfish, yeah. Now, the way these two axes interact with each other, I think, is very, very interesting. Can be. And this is a good understanding when you're building your own character what this means. So, like, the best way to think of it is that the lawful to chaotic axes generally represents how that character achieves the baser motivations described in the other axes of good and evil. An example of this would be that a lawful good character is lawful good because they think that the laws that they're following are what's best for everyone. That no matter how complicated or weird things get due to the rules that they're following, that it is ultimately for the greater good of everyone around them to follow those rules, that those rules are providing some good to the world. And the best measurement of knowing the alignment of a character, I think, the true alignment, is that if a true lawful good character were to be presented earnestly with evidence that they cannot doubt that their laws are not for the betterment of others, that it does not help anyone, then that lawful good character would either change what rules that they follow or would stop being lawful altogether. Because what matters more is the second part. The good part matters more than the lawful part. The lawful part is just the manner in which this character thinks is best to achieve the good ends. And that's how it works for the other ones. A lawful evil character is following a set of rules strictly because they think that it is best for their survival or their well-being or their own just personal life to follow those rules. And I think this is, to get back to the Ashling video, I think this is what holds the most possibilities for like a good player character alignment, because you can very easily make a set of rules for, this ultimately selfish evil character that they follow, that they think helps them. A good example of this could be that one of their rules could be that they act good. Outside of like in 99% of circumstances, it could be that one of their rules is just that they act good and pertain to very good-like laws. Not because they actually are good, not because they actually care about the well-being of others, but because they have this understanding that providing for other people ultimately serves them in some fashion. Then they do it, thus resulting in a lawful evil character who can quite easily become neutral or chaotic evil should it be proven that those laws are no longer helping him thrive. And yeah, I think that in general just kind of describes everything about this dynamic, but I think I'll go ahead and talk about some specific character examples that I have encountered that I thought were great embodiments of those concepts. I think the best example of a lawful neutral character that I have ever seen is a Goliath barbarian that I played alongside, and she spent a ludicrous amount of time making a incredibly well fleshed out set of tribalistic laws and rules that this barbarian followed. Specific manners in which they fight, specific ways that they treat enemies of different types, specific ways that they view magic, specific ways that they view buying goods, and just an entire moral system that this character follows blindly, essentially. They are fully and utterly committed to this moral system. And when you and it led to a lot of bad things. You could easily think that they were an evil character because of how they acted. There was a lot of killing civilians because they disrespected their honor. Lots of stealing things because they thought they had right to the property, and just lots of situations like that. So you might assume that that character is evil. They weren't. They were lawful, neutral, and what that means specifically in her case was that she followed the rules that she was born with, not because she thought it was better for her, and not because she thought it was better for anyone else either, but strictly for the sake of the rules themselves. She existed almost as an embodiment of this moral system. She did not hold like this opinion of it like she thought it was good for herself or for others. She did not think like this moral system could have led to an absolute calamity in which she and everything she cared about would be burned away, and she would suffer endlessly, and she would still commit to acting like this as a character because it isn't about the consequences. It isn't about what's right. It isn't about what's wrong. It's about following those rules. And she did. It was great. It was beautiful. A lot of respect. Mostly respect for fleshing out that complicated of a moral system just for one character, but also just how well that embodies lawful neutral. How well. It's amazing. And so that's one. And I've also played as a character that had a very different kind of mindset. One character I've played as that I've mentioned before, but I'll talk about the specific aspect of them now. This character's name's Dravel Mixon. He is a draconic sorcerer who is also a merchant. I have a video on him on my channel. Go check it out. It's pretty good. Not really, but my content isn't good yet. But yes, go check out that video for more context. But the way I wrote him and played him was as neutral good. And that is because or at least what he believed were good intentions. He wanted other people to prosper. But he was not particularly committed to any set of rules to do so, nor was he particularly adverse to rules nor was he particularly committed to a certain sense of ambiguity. It was just kind of this idea where he would examine each situation and go, all right, this is the way that gets the, most amount of people happy and healthy. Thus I will do that. And I determined that this was neutral good, and that he had this case-by-case analysis of everything that happened. But there was another aspect to him that was really fun. And this is something else I want to bring up, is that there is something about his morality that made him a little grayer, in that while his intentions are good, and his actions are good, there's something even deeper under the surface of his brain that isn't good. In that he was a psycho, in a sense. In that as a draconic sorcerer, a chromatic draconic sorcerer, as in he got his powers from a black dragon, this led to him having a lot of the basic underlying core tendencies of a black dragon, which he mostly ignored or fought off and was mostly committed to being good. But it was kind of this interesting idea that technically, if he were to just let go of everything else about himself and just stuck with what was in his heart, then he would act more like a neutral evil, is what he would more like maybe even chaotic evil. He would kill people, take whatever he wanted, and just generally be a very bad person. But he didn't, because he was raised by his parents to have good intentions, and that's what he did. And so, something that I would say with alignment is something that can be fun is just saying, oh, make an alignment for how they act and have that aligned for how they are, and that's fine. But there's also a lot of fun things you can do in creating two alignments. One alignment for how they act, and one alignment that represents a certain underlying nature of them, which they may or may not even know is there. That can lead to a lot of very interesting character moments and a lot of very interesting ways to think about them. Or, to make it even more dynamic, you could think of certain triggers that could make your character change their alignment temporarily. An example of this would be if you have a character who is good-natured and has a younger sister, you could argue that suffering the death of their little sister could make them change to evil. That is to say that the death of their little sister would cause them to forgo all of their previous moral ideas upon helping other people and be so focused on their own selfish desire for revenge that they have become an evil character. So that's another thing to think about, is thinking about, okay, are there any potential triggers to turn my character into a different alignment? Is there anything like that could happen? And you could do that also with an evil character. Like if an evil character managed to fall in love with someone, that could expand their moral preconceptions enough that they start genuinely caring about other people's well-being. So yeah, I've rambled enough on this. And so if any of you guys have anything fun to say about alignment, or like characters you've had with particular that embodied certain alignments pretty well, feel free to leave a comment. And go check out Ashling VT. And go slap the shit out of her like button and subscribe button, and for me as well. And yeah, have a good day.